first thing I heard was the throne screaming. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. The ancient blood throne beneath Norman's body let out a sound that had no name in any language the realm currently used. Low, tectonic, the groan of 400 years of stored memory, suddenly straining against something it refused to accept. It moved through the black marble floor and up through the souls of every wolf in that hall. I felt it in my teeth. The torches along the walls didn't flicker. They bent, hard, sideways, like something invisible had pushed every flame in the same direction at once. 3 of them died entirely. The amber carvings in the throne's surface cracked open with light, the color of burning copper, and the cracks spread outward across the platform, like a living thing trying to escape stone. Council elders stumbled from their seats. One of the Southern Alphas dropped a hand to the floor for balance. The air in the hall changed. I could smell it, sharp and mineral, like the moment before lightning strikes standing water. Every wolf in that room smelled it. Some of them didn't understand what it was, but their bodies understood. Their bodies had always understood. The throne was rejecting him, not quietly, not ambiguously, violently. Norman didn't rise. He sat with both hands locked around the armrests, knuckles white, jaw set, trying to contain something that could not be contained through sheer force of will. He had been trained for this moment since childhood. He had rehearsed every word of the coronation binding. He had sat in preparation rooms with Edwin and council advisors for months, walking through every step of the ceremony. Nobody had prepared him for the throne saying no. And me? I was standing 30 feet away in exile chains. My wrists had been bleeding for 10 minutes. Silver restraints against dynastic blood, which burns the way salted wounds burn, steadily and without relief. The scent of my own iron was thick in the back of my throat. My ceremonial dress, the one they'd put me in to humiliate me, the white of someone being processed for trial, was still damp from the rain outside. Hundreds of wolves were staring at me. But the throne was not. The throne was staring at something it remembered. Another groan tore through the chamber, longer this time, deeper. The sound of the stone itself announcing an opinion. The amber light beneath Norman's body pulsed once, hard, like a warning heartbeat. Not warming toward him, recoiling from him. Every wolf in the hall who had lived long enough to attend a real coronation understood in that moment what they were witnessing. The blood throne had never once, in 4 centuries, responded this way to the correct heir. The hall understood before Norman did. And then, in the exact moment Edwin began to stand, in the exact moment the council prepared to contain what they could not explain, Norman's eyes moved. Not to Edwin, not to the throne, to me. And in his face, beneath the locked jaw and the controlled posture, and the 9 years of constructed certainty, I saw it. Recognition. The kind that comes before thought. The kind the blood produces when it finally, after years of looking, finds what it's been looking for. He knew who I was. He had always known. And that was when I understood that the throne wasn't the only thing in that hall that had been lying. There is a law older than every council seat in the realm. Older than the border stones. Older than the first territorial maps drawn in blood and charcoal on the walls of the Highland caves. The blood throne does not lie. It cannot be convinced. It cannot be threatened. It cannot be purchased with ceremony, or neutralized by proclamation, or deceived by the kind of patient, generational political engineering that men like Edwin spent their lives perfecting. For over 400 years, the throne has responded to one thing and one thing only: the blood of the true dynastic line. When the right blood sat on it, it answered. When anything else tried, it waited in silence, until the day it didn't wait, until the day it decided silence was no longer sufficient. My name is Catherine, and what I'm about to tell you is not simply the story of a woman reclaiming a throne that was taken from her. It is the story of what happens when a kingdom builds 9 years of power on a grave, and the grave refuses to stay quiet. It is the story of a man who knew the truth and chose the unlocked door instead of the open one, and what that half courage cost both of us. And it is the story of a throne that remembered what every person in that hall had agreed to forget. If you're new to Adeline's Story Vault, welcome. Stories like this one are why this channel exists. Subscribe now and never miss what's coming next. For 9 years, I had been called Catherine, not Catherine. Not the name my mother pressed into my ear the night before the council guards came. The name she whispered the way you whisper something you are terrified to lose, but cannot keep. Just Catherine. A servant girl in the outer wash quarters of the Iron Spire Pack compound. Unremarkable. Safe, because nobody looks twice at something unremarkable. That was the arrangement my mother made before she died. She had gone to a blood reader named Blair, a woman who lived in the hill caves above the northern forest and traded in identity, the way other people traded in salt. Practical. Dangerous. Absolutely without sentiment. Blair had altered the scent records, redirected the blood registry, given a terrified 9-year-old a borrowed name and a borrowed past, and sent her into the world with one instruction: do not remember who you are. I was good at it. For years, I was very good at it. Catherine was quiet and efficient, and kept her eyes down, and never stood anywhere she wasn't supposed to be. Catherine had no history. Catherine had no bloodline. Catherine hauled water barrels and folded linen, and did not press her palm against the archive hall wall at night to feel whether the stone breathed back. Except that last part was a lie. Because I did that. I did it regularly, compulsively, with a hunger I did not have the language for. Standing in the dark, with my bare palm flat against old stone, waiting for the vibration that came sometimes, when the moon was right, when something deep in the building's foundation seemed to stir and acknowledge the pressure of my hand. I never told anyone. I had no one to tell. Not the other servants. Women who had earned their survival through invisibility the same way I had. Not the compound wolves who passed through the wash quarters without seeing us. Not even Doris. Especially not Doris. Doris was the kitchen keeper. Older, solid, the kind of woman who moved through a room and left it more organized without appearing to have done anything. She had been kind to me since I was small, in ways that required no explanation, and asked for none. Extra bread in winter, covered shifts when I was sick, a look sometimes, across the preparation room, that I didn't know how to read. I should have known it sooner. The way she looked at me was not the way someone looks at a servant girl. It was the way someone looks at a thing they've been protecting for a long time and are afraid of losing. I was 18 when she finally said it. We were at the preparation table. I was folding linen. She was working across from me, and neither of us had spoken for a long time. And then, without preamble, without looking up, she said, "Your mother had your eyes, you know." My hands stopped. The linen sat half-folded between my fingers. The fire in the hearth made its small sounds, and for a moment, I couldn't locate my own breath. "I never told you that," Doris continued, her voice dropping low, "and I'm not telling you now, if anyone asks. But I knew Elena. I knew what she claimed, and I know what they did to her for claiming it. Elena, my mother's real name, in the air, aloud, for the first time in 9 years. Something cracked open in my chest. Not a metaphorical crack. Something physical. An actual sensation, like a seam giving way under pressure it had held for too long. My eyes filled before I could stop them, and I hated that. Hated the sudden helplessness of it. Hated that 9 years of Catherine's discipline could come apart over 2 syllables spoken by a woman folding kitchen linens. I pressed my lips together hard and looked at the ceiling and breathed through my nose, and absolutely did not cry in the preparation room, because Catherine did not cry. But Catherine did. Catherine had been crying for 9 years, in the one room no one could see into. "The mating mark she carried," Doris said very quietly, "was not a lie. Whatever they told you, whatever they wrote in the records, it was not a lie. She gathered her work and left before I could speak. She did not look back. I think she knew I needed the room. I sat there alone for a long time. The linen in my hands was crushed from a grip I hadn't felt myself apply, and the thing that had cracked open in my chest wasn't closing. It was opening wider, a kind of ancient knowing that had been waiting so long for someone to finally say a true thing aloud, that it didn't know how to contain itself now that it had. Not hope, exactly. Something sharper. Something that wanted something. It would be 3 months before the courier arrived, and everything changed. But that was the night the story truly began, because that was the night Catherine started losing her grip on me. And 3 months later, when a courier named Clark stopped in front of me on the servant line and said nothing, just looked, I understood that Doris had not been the only one watching. The summons arrived on a Tuesday, wash day, which meant I was elbow deep in cold water when the courier's wolf approached the compound gate. All servant staff were required to present for count when official realm messengers came through. Formality. Nobody ever actually looked. Clark looked. I knew him by reputation. Lean, Eastern-born, guild-trained, the kind of messenger who survived long assignments because he noticed things without appearing to. He walked the servant line once, twice, stopped in front of me on the second pass, and stood there for 3 full seconds without speaking. Catherine kept her eyes down. Catherine always kept her eyes down. He moved on, but I felt the pause like a hand on my shoulder. Later, tucked between 2 courtyard stones on my usual path, a folded page, no seal on the outside. Inside, in handwriting that was too clean to be careless, Southern Gate, before dawn, alone. I burned it. I spent 6 hours telling myself I wasn't going. I went. Clark was waiting in the tree shadow, with the stillness of someone accustomed to places where being seen meant not surviving. He handed me a cylinder without greeting. Old seal. An amber ring pressed into black wax. Dynasty design. The kind used before the current council redesigned everything, and renamed everything, and rewrote everything to erase the period before their authority began. My hands weren't steady when I broke it. I'm telling you that plainly, because I want you to understand. I was not brave in that moment. I was frightened in the way that lives in the stomach, the way that makes your vision narrow, and your hands feel distant from your body. But I broke the seal. Inside, blood script, formal dynastic language. a document that servant girls in wash quarters should not be able to read. I read every word. It was a blood archive legal notice, generated automatically, without human instruction, by the living record system embedded in the ceremonial hall's foundation when a coronation was scheduled. The archive had cross-referenced all living individuals against the dynastic blood record. It had found a discrepancy. It had produced a notice and addressed it to the person carrying unregistered dynastic blood. The notice was addressed to Catherine, daughter of Elena, marked mate of the late Alpha King Reed of the First Dynasty. My mother's mating bond had never been dissolved. My name had been removed from the blood registry by council order. My bloodline claim to the throne was... The document used this word with the cool precision of a record that does not care about politics. Superseded all appointed succession, including Norman's. Someone had authorized this notice to reach me. The archive generated it, but a document only survives delivery if someone leaves the door open, which meant someone in that compound already knew what I was, and had decided, quietly, to let the truth move. Clark had not moved from the tree line. When I finally looked up, his expression was the same as it had been in the servant line, reading me the way a careful man reads a situation he didn't create, but has agreed to be part of. 3 days, he said, before the coronation. To do what? Present the notice, or disappear again. He paused. Those are your only 2 choices. There isn't a third. He left without answering the question I hadn't asked yet. The question pressed against the inside of my teeth. The entire walk back to the compound, warm and growing. Did Norman know? Did he know what I was? Had he always known? I placed the notice in the lining of my boot next to the amber stone Blair had pressed into my palm 7 years earlier. 2 pieces of a truth the kingdom had tried to bury. And I walked back through the gates before the sun came up. 3 days. I used exactly one of them to decide. Because Doris had said, "It was not a lie, child." And because my mother had bargained with Blair so that her daughter could survive long enough to eventually make a choice. That was the choice. I walked into the ceremonial hall 3 days later, wearing a servant's entry pass and carrying a dynasty seal. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that the throne had been waiting for me since the moment the coronation was announced, and that it would make itself heard in a way that left no room for denial. The realm's ceremonial hall holds 1,200 wolves. On coronation day, it held more. Noble house representatives in the galleries, pack delegates lining the walls, council elders in their tiered seats arranged in strict order of tenure, torches on every column. The black marble floor polished until it held reflections like dark water. I had used Doris's servant pass to get through the outer gate. She had pressed it into my hand without asking anything, her fingers trembling in a way her face carefully did not. I'd moved through the standing crowd to a position near the left gallery columns, far enough back to be a body in a crowd, close enough to see his face. Norman entered through the western arch. I had seen him twice before, from distance, in my 9 years at the compound. Both times I had felt something I'd refused to name. A low pull in the chest, like a current running under still water. A biological awareness of someone my body believed it already knew. I had filed it under the general category of things Catherine did not investigate. I understood now what it was. The mate bond, inherited from my mother's side. A connection built into my bloodline, looking for its dynastic anchor, looking for the throne, looking for him. Standing in the hall, watching Norman move through the crowd, watching the Highland alphas incline their heads, watching the Southern delegates straighten, watching the room respond to him the way rooms respond to people who have been told since birth that they are the center of things. I felt the pull again, stronger than before, and hated myself for it. Because here is what I need to be honest with you about. I had spent the 3 days since Clark's note telling myself I was walking into that hall to deliver a legal document, to exercise a blood archive right, to do something my mother had died without being able to do. I had not let myself think about him. And standing there watching him walk toward the throne, something I didn't have a word for moved through me. Something jagged and furious and grief-soaked, because he was tall and certain and carrying an authority that should have been mine, and he had 9 years of a life built on my erasure, and the body that recognized him as something significant was the same body that bore the scars of what his world had done to preserve itself. I wanted, for one very clear second, to leave. I pressed my foot against the stone of my boot, felt the archive notice crinkle against my ankle, felt the amber stone beneath it, warm. I stayed. Norman sat on the throne. The hall went silent. I counted my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. The amber carvings in the throne's surface did not respond. Not silence. Something worse than silence. Every wolf who had attended a real coronation knew the throne's response should have been immediate. The warmth should have come the instant the heir's weight settled into the seat. It should have radiated upward through the dynasty symbols, filled the carved channels, spread light outward across the platform. Nothing moved. Norman's hands tightened on the armrests. Edwin cleared his throat and began the recitation. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had managed crises before, and believed that if you filled the silence with enough official language, the silence would eventually give up and go away. That was when the amber stone in my boot ignited. Not warmth, heat. Sudden, insistent, moving up through the sole of my foot and into my ankle, like the stone had been waiting for exactly this moment and had decided it was done, being patient. I pressed my lips together against the sensation. My palm found the archive notice. I walked forward. The crowd moved without understanding why. Pack instinct. Bodies responding to something their minds hadn't caught up to yet. A path opened in front of me. Edwin's recitation stopped. I raised the archive notice so the dynasty seal faced the council. Norman's eyes crossed the hall and found mine. I had expected anger. I had prepared for anger, for the reflexive fury of someone watching their authority challenged in public, for the machinery of offense to deploy the way it had deployed in every version of this moment I had imagined. What I got instead stopped me for one breath that I hope did not show on my face. He looked relieved, for one unguarded instant, before the controlled expression came back, before the role reasserted itself. The man on the throne looked like someone whose sentence had just ended. And then, the throne remembered me. The amber stone in my boot answered something it had recognized across the room, and the sound that came from the throne was not like anything I had been told to expect. It was not a chime, or a resonance, or a gentle glow. It was the sound of a 400-year-old living organism, announcing that the thing it had been storing had finally come home. The floor cracked amber. The wall carvings lit. Every torch in the hall bent toward the platform simultaneously. Wolves dropped. Not all of them. Not yet. but enough to make the room feel like something massive had shifted beneath it. What happened next was not Edwin deploying a practiced response. What happened next was Edwin doing the only thing left to him, reaching for the chains he had already ordered brought to the hall, because he had known I was coming. He had been prepared for me. And that meant Norman had told him, or someone had. The question was, how long had they been waiting for this exact moment? The chains were on me in under 2 minutes. Silver restraints. Council issue. Applied by 2 pack enforcers who moved through the crowd with the smooth efficiency of people executing a plan they had rehearsed. Edwin had ordered it before the throne finished vibrating, which told me everything I needed to know about whether my arrival had been a surprise. It had not been a surprise. The silver burned the way it always burns against dynastic blood, deeply, continuously, without the numbering effect that silver has on ordinary wolves. My wrists didn't go numb. They stayed fully, completely present to the sensation, which was the point. A demonstration. A message to the hall. We can contain what you just witnessed. We have the tools. We are in control. They did not remove me from the hall, and I understood why. Removing me would suggest they were afraid of me. Better to leave me visible, restrained, bleeding quietly, while Edwin restarted the ceremony, and the official narrative reassembled itself around the interruption. She is a bloodline fraud, a disruptor, a desperate woman attempting to exploit a historic ceremony for political theater. It would have worked. Probably it would have worked. The realm had a long history of accepting whatever Edwin told it to accept, except that the throne was not cooperating. Every time Edwin raised his voice for the recitation, the amber carvings pulsed. Slowly, deliberately. Not the violent response of my arrival. Something quieter and more terrible. Like the stone was declining to pretend. Like 400 years of patient record-keeping had finally decided it would not be a prop in someone else's performance. The ceremony stalled, and Norman stood. He did not address the council. He did not look at Edwin. He walked to the edge of the throne platform, and he looked at me with an expression I had spent so long preparing to be angry at, that I didn't know, in that moment, what to do with what I actually saw. He looked like a man who had been holding something underwater for a long time, and was watching it surface. "How long have you been in the compound?" he asked. The hall was so quiet the question reached every wall. 9 years, I said. 9 years. Let that land for a moment, because it landed for him. I watched it land, watched something move through his jaw, through the set of his shoulders, through the specific way his eyes stopped focusing on my face, and went somewhere interior and painful. He had known I existed. He had not known I was 40 meters from his daily life. He had not known I was carrying water barrels. He had not known I was sleeping in servant quarters inside a compound he walked through twice a week. The controlled expression cracked. Not fully, not publicly, but enough that I saw it. A fracture in the performance. Something raw underneath. "Remove the chains," he said. Edwin stepped forward. "My lord, this woman has presented a fraudulent... Remove them now." His voice dropped instead of rising. That is a particular kind of authority, the kind that does not need volume, the kind that has been tested enough times to know that quiet is more effective than loud. The chains came off. I did not rub my wrists. I did not give Edwin the satisfaction of watching me acknowledge the pain. I kept my eyes on Norman, and he kept his eyes on me. and for a moment the hall contained only the two of us, standing on opposite sides of every choice that had been made in the last 9 years. Then Blair appeared. I still don't know how she entered the hall. She was simply there, moving through the left gallery with the calm of someone who had been planning this approach for years, which she had. In her hands, a blood archive cylinder, larger than the one that had contained my notice, older, the dynasty wax seal intact. She placed it on the floor between me and the throne platform, stepped back. Edwin's face went very still. Fred, the oldest Highland Alpha, a wolf whose reputation for honesty was the reason he had survived this long, in a realm where honesty was frequently inconvenient, bent and picked up the cylinder, turned it, read the seal. His scent changed in a way everyone in the room could read. He recognized it. "Open it," Norman said. "My lord." Edwin's voice had not changed. That was the terrifying thing about Edwin. The voice never changed. This is not the appropriate venue for Edwin. One word, no emphasis. The kind of quiet that is its own verdict. Edwin opened it. What Fred read aloud did not land gradually. It landed all at once, the way a wall comes down, not piece by piece, but in a single movement that turns what was solid into rubble. The birth record, the mating mark documentation, the council order, signed by Edwin and 2 colleagues currently seated in the first row of tiered chairs, directing the blood registry to remove my name, reclassify my mother's claim as fraudulent, and proceed with the execution order. Execution. My mother had not died of illness. My mother had not died of grief. My mother had been executed by council order on fabricated legal grounds to clear the succession line for a coronation that should never have been valid. I had known something close to this. Blair had told me fragments over the years, careful pieces, never the whole, protecting me from the weight of full knowledge until I was old enough to carry it. I thought I had been ready. I thought 9 years of living inside a stolen identity had prepared me for whatever the documents said. It hadn't. Nothing prepares you for hearing your mother's death reclassified as administrative procedure in a room full of the people who had decided it was necessary. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Not because crying would have been wrong, but because what I felt was not grief in that moment. It was something larger and colder, and without a clean name. Something that looked at the word execution, written in official blood archive ink, and understood, finally and completely, the scale of what had been done. Not just to my mother, to me. To the 9 years of borrowed names and cold water, and a stone that breathed at night. I watched Edwin's face while Fred read. He did not collapse. He was too old and too practiced for collapse. But the blankness he had maintained through my arrival, through the chains, through the throne's response. It cracked at the edges, not into remorse, into something older. The look of a structure whose load-bearing wall has been removed and is only now beginning to understand what that means for everything above it. He looked old, not in years, in weight. Norman had not moved from the edge of the platform. When Fred finished reading, he turned to Edwin for a long moment, said nothing, then turned to me. Catherine, not the woman, not the disruptor, not the fraudulent claimant. Catherine, my name, in his voice, in front of everyone who had been told I didn't exist. I need you to sit on the throne. The hall erupted. I didn't move immediately. I need you to understand that, because this moment gets remembered later, as the moment Catherine stepped forward with certainty and reclaimed what was hers. That is not how it felt. What it felt like was 9 years of Catherine pulling in the opposite direction. 9 years of down eyes and quiet footsteps. And do not take up space. Do not be visible. Do not let anything recognize you. That training does not dissolve in a ceremony. It is in the muscles. It is in the instinct. Standing in front of 1,200 wolves, with my name still in the air, with my wrists still burning from the silver, with the throne glowing 40 feet away, every piece of the person I had taught myself to be was saying, "You should leave." It was Doris's voice that broke it. She was not in the hall. She could not have been in the hall. But I heard her the way you hear things that have mattered long enough to live in your body. Her voice at the preparation table, quiet, certain. It was not a lie, child. I walked to the throne. The crowd parted, not because anyone directed it to, because pack instinct is older than manners, and something in that room was responding to something in me that political history had never managed to fully suppress. Bodies moved without decisions being made. A path opened. Norman stepped left. I passed close enough to him to feel the warmth coming off his skin in the cold hall air. Close enough that the mate bond, the real bond, not the ghost pull I'd spent years dismissing, woke fully for the first time, and I understood with uncomfortable clarity why my body had always known him before my mind was willing to. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said the thing that was going to take months to say properly, the thing that had been pressing against the inside of his chest for a very long time. I sat on the throne. The amber light did not warm. It detonated. A total, soundless ignition, like compressed sunrise, like 4 centuries of stored recognition releasing at once. Every carved line on the throne's surface blazed. The channels spread outward across the platform, and then across the floor, and then up the walls. Every amber inlay in every piece of ceremonial architecture answering simultaneously. The whole building becoming a single coherent signal. This blood. This is what I have been waiting for. The hall went down. Not in commanded ceremony. Not in coordinated political theater. In pure biological response. Pack instinct at its oldest and most involuntary. The kind that overrides rank and territory and everything a wolf has been told to believe about who holds authority. 1,200 wolves moved to their knees. The council elders, the Highland alphas, the southern delegates, the standing wolves in the rear galleries, all of them. Edwin was the last. I want you to understand what that looked like. Not as triumph. I am past needing it to feel like triumph. But as fact, because the hall deserved a witness, and I was the only one positioned to be one. He did not drop. That would have been too clean, too dramatic, too much like surrender, and not enough like consequence. What happened was slower. His knees bent one at a time, with the mechanical reluctance of a man whose body had decided something his mind was still refusing to process. He went down the way a structure goes down, when the foundational lie beneath it has been publicly removed, not with violence, but with the horrible inevitability of weight that can no longer find support. His face, when his knees finally met the marble, was still controlled. That was the most unsettling part. Edwin had spent 40 years managing the distance between his expression and his reality, and even now, even here, kneeling in the hall, where he had ordered my mother's execution, in front of the archive documentation bearing his signature, the mask held. But his hands, pressed flat against his thighs, were shaking. Not in grief, not in fear, exactly. In the specific tremor of a man confronting the gap between the version of events he has told himself for decades and the version the world now knows. That gap had just become impossible to close. Permanently, publicly, in front of 1,200 witnesses. He did not look at me. I noticed that. Every wolf in that hall had their eyes on the throne, on the amber light still radiating outward through the stone beneath my hands. Edwin kept his gaze at the floor 2 feet in front of him. I held the throne's warmth, and I looked at him, and I thought about my mother in that same hall, whether she had known what was coming, whether she had fought, whether she had looked at Edwin and seen, as I was seeing now, a man who believed he was protecting a world that needed him. He had been right about one thing. The world needed someone to hold it together. He had been catastrophically wrong about who that someone was. Norman did not kneel. He stood at the left of the throne platform, and he watched me. And I spent a long time afterward learning to read the expression he wore in that moment correctly. It was not pride exactly. It was not regret exactly. It was the face of someone watching a consequence arrive that they had spent years both dreading and needing. The specific relief of a thing you have been carrying alone, finally becoming visible to the world. Here is what I learned afterward. Norman had found the blood archive records when he was 16 years old, and he had gone directly to Edwin with them, which means everything that followed, everything Edwin had built, Norman had been part of. Not by design, but by the silence that follows when a boy is told that the alternative to the lie is civil war. Edwin had explained it the way architects explain necessary load-bearing walls. The realm's stability, the alternative of fracture. The girl was safe. The girl would remain safe. This was the sacrifice required for the world not to come apart. Norman had believed him. For years, he had believed him, and believing it had not made it easier. And the older he grew, the more the belief wore through at the edges, the way beliefs do when they are asked to hold weight they were never designed for. Because the archive never stopped knowing. It kept sending signals. It kept looking for its missing piece. And Norman, who could not fix what Edwin had done, who could not publicly correct 9 years of constructed history without the mechanism to force the truth into the open, had done the one thing available to him. He had left one door unlocked. Clark had carried a message Norman had authorized without his name on it, a quiet instruction. If the archive ever generates a legal challenge notice, make sure it reaches the person it is addressed to. He had not found me. He had not opened the door. He had simply declined once, quietly, to lock it the way Edwin wanted it locked. Whether that was courage or cowardice is a question I sat with for a long time. The answer I arrived at eventually is, it was both. And the weight of both is why the courtyard conversation 6 weeks later mattered as much as it did. But first, the weeks between. The realm's restructuring was slow and contested and painful in the way that systemic correction always is. Nobody who built their position on the false order was eager to dismantle it. Sophia, a blood records scholar who had been working with Blair for years, in quiet preparation for exactly this moment, spent 3 months auditing every document the old council had touched. She found 11 additional falsifications. 11 other people whose records had been altered to support the succession Edwin had engineered. 11 lives, rewritten. Edwin faced a blood arbitration tribunal. He did not face execution. I was asked, and I said no. I wanted something more permanent than his death. I wanted Edwin to attend my mother's ceremonial reinstatement. Not as a prisoner, not under guard, as a witness, which is the cruelest version of accountability available in the realm's blood law, because a witness cannot look away, cannot speak, cannot leave until the record is complete. The reinstatement ceremony was held 6 weeks after the coronation, in the same hall, the same torches, the same black marble floor. Fred read the official restoration of Elena's name into the dynastic blood record. Her full name, her bloodline, her mating bond to Alpha King Reed acknowledged and permanently archived, while Edwin stood in the first row of the witness circle. I watched him during the reading. His hands were clasped in front of him. His face was the face he had worn his entire career, composed, unreadable, professionally neutral. The face of a man who has survived 40 years of other people's crises by never letting his own become visible. But there was a moment. One moment, when Fred read the line about the execution order and stated aloud that it had been issued on fabricated grounds, that it had been illegal murder carried out under false documentation, when something crossed Edwin's face that I had never seen there before. It was not remorse. I want to be clear about that. A man like Edwin does not arrive at remorse in a single ceremony. It was recognition, the kind that happens when a person finally, in public, in front of everyone, understands that the story they told themselves, the necessary sacrifice, the stability it preserved, the greater good it served, is not the story the world will tell about them. He would carry his name in those documents for the rest of his life. Every scholar who accessed the dynastic archive would read his signature beneath the execution order. Every generation of pack historians would learn what he had done, and why, and what it had cost. He had wanted to manage the truth. Instead, he would be inside it forever. That was my consequence for Edwin, the weight of a truth he could no longer manage. Doris received a formal pack rank for the first time in her life. She cried, which she would have been humiliated by, and so I did not mention it. I simply let the ceremony happen, and watched her face, and kept the moment private the way she had kept my existence private for 9 years. Blair left a plain, dark stone on my window ledge the morning after the coronation. No amber line, just the stone. Ordinary, warm. I kept it. And then there was Norman. We did not speak privately for 6 weeks, not because I was punishing him, though he likely expected that, and perhaps deserved it, but because I needed to understand what I was choosing before I chose it. The mate bond is real. It is not metaphorical. It is a biological fact, woven into dynastic bloodlines, and it had been pulling toward him since I was old enough to feel it, and I was not willing to call that pull a decision. I wanted to decide with the parts of me that were not dynastic obligation. 6 weeks after the coronation, in the outer courtyard before dawn, both of us with cold tea, both of us wearing the kind of tiredness that comes from rebuilding something large, he spoke first. I had arrived before him. That mattered to me. Arriving first, choosing the bench, having my hands already wrapped around the cup before he came through the gate. Small things. The territory of someone who is choosing to be present rather than being summoned. He sat across from me. Not beside me. Across. Which told me he understood the geometry of the conversation we were about to have. For a while, neither of us spoke. The courtyard was the particular dark that happens just before birds, when the night has run out of depth, but the light hasn't committed yet. I could hear him breathing. I could feel the mate bond doing what it always did now, pulling low in my chest, warm, insistent, and I did not reach for it. Not yet. That was the discipline of the 6 weeks, to be fully aware of the pull, and to feel it, and to make decisions anyway. He was holding his cup with both hands. I noticed that. Norman, who had stood in front of 1,200 wolves and let a truth crack his face open and not looked away. Norman was holding a cup of cold tea with both hands, the way a person holds something when they are not sure what to do with their hands. I found that, against my better judgment, clarifying. I left the door unlocked. I know. It wasn't enough. No, I said. It wasn't. A silence. The kind that has a shape. I'm not going to apologize for what I didn't do, he said. I don't think apology covers it. What I didn't do was a failure. I have to carry that. I looked at him for a moment. This man who had known what I was while I hauled water barrels 40 meters from his daily life, who had been given the truth at 16 and handed it to Edwin, and spent years watching what that choice cost, who had unlocked one door and called it enough when it clearly was not. Yes, I said. You do. He nodded. No argument. No softening. He took the weight the way someone takes a weight they have already assessed and accepted. That was the moment. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness is too clean and too final for something this complicated. But the moment I decided I could build something in the same space as his regret, without letting the regret be the foundation. The throne governs by blood memory. It does not govern by intention, or fear, or the pragmatic stories we tell ourselves to survive our own choices. It governs by what is true. What was true? I was the heir. My mother's mark was real. Her death was unjust. The mate bond was real. And what I built with it was mine to decide. I decided to build. Slowly. Honestly. With full knowledge of the cracks in the foundation. The archive was clean. My mother's name was restored. The blood throne had remembered. And I, Catherine, daughter of Elena, no longer Marin, no longer the woman with cold water on her hands, sat in the seat the realm had tried to erase me from. Not to prove anything. Not for revenge. Because the kingdom had spent 9 years deciding what I was permitted to be. And I had spent 9 years folding linen and hauling water and pressing my palm against stone walls, in the dark, and waiting. And now, I was done waiting. The throne remembered. The archive was honest. My mother's name was carved back into the record in letters that would outlast every man who had ordered them removed. That is what power looks like when it has been earned through patience rather than seized through force. It does not announce itself. It simply becomes undeniable. Because the blood remembered. And I had decided to remember alongside it. Catherine's story is not about reclaiming a throne. It is about what happens when truth runs out of patience. The blood throne could not be bribed. It could not be reasoned with. It had been storing a name for 400 years, and when the body carrying that name finally walked into the room, it said so, loudly, in front of everyone, at the worst possible moment, for everyone who had agreed to the lie. Systems built on erasure always carry that risk. The longer they hold, the louder the correction when it comes. Catherine survived 9 years as Marin because someone left a door unlocked. Not out of courage, but out of something more complicated. She sat on the throne, not because the world handed it to her, but because she walked into a room where the truth had no exit strategy. What stays with you after this story is not the power, it's the patience. The 9 years of cold water and stone walls that breathed at night. The name her mother pressed into her ear before the guards came. Truth has a kind of patience that outlasts every strategy built to contain it. That is what the throne knew. Now, before you go, I need to ask you something. The mate bond hit Catherine the moment she passed Norman on her way to the throne. Not the ghost pull she had spent years dismissing. The real thing. Warm, specific, impossible to explain away. And he felt it too. You could see it in the way his breath changed. But here is what I want to know. Do you think Catherine made the right choice? Do you trust Norman? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me, was the unlocked door enough? Or did he owe her more? Did the mate bond make you feel something? Or did it come too soon? Because the comment section on stories like this one is always the best part. You all see things I didn't plan for. Subscribe to Adeline's Story Vault. The next story begins where you least expect it. And the mate bond in that one? It doesn't ask permission.